This is China back in 1985. Now, this is today's China.
Global economic powerhouse.
Social transformation, economic transformation.
From this to this in just 40 years. Amazing, right? Back in 1980, India and China were actually quite similar economically. India's GDP was around $230 billion and China's was about $310 billion. Not too far apart. But soon, China started growing way faster than India, about 5 times its size. They built factories everywhere, improved their infrastructure and focused on becoming the world's manufacturing hub. But now, things are changing. China's economy is slowing down, and Western companies are looking to move their factories to other countries. Major companies like Apple have moved their production unit to India, and global investors are pouring in money. Service sector is booming, and our startups are flourishing. And our digital infrastructure like UPI is actually more advanced than many developed countries. Could it be that it is now India's turn to replicate China's growth miracle? This is the question that pops up everywhere. Can India become the next China? In this video, we are going to skip all the regular answers like India needs to solve the corruption problem first, India needs a more liberalized economy, develop its infrastructure and increase education, and instead focus on what really matters. If you are wondering, why can't we just replicate China's model? Well, it won't work. China's growth path will never work for India. India's case is quite unique. Unlike China's top-down approach, where the government took over complete control, India has to grow while maintaining its democratic system. So, in today's video, we'll dive deep into 2 important questions. How China's economy took off and grew so rapidly, and why India cannot replicate China's success. This is Kunal, and you are watching Insights by TBH. India's real issue isn't that we don't know what to do. The problem is that we couldn't properly follow China's strategy because of how our political system works. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not just shifting all the blame to the government, but our local governments are often understaffed and focus more on local interests. Even if India overtakes Japan in the next 5 to 6 years, we'll still be a relatively poor country. Now, there might be other economic models for India to follow, but India can never grow like China. But to understand why, we first need to answer how China grew so much faster than India in the first place. What exactly caused such a huge gap in between India and China in 1990s and early 2000s? China implemented what I would like to call a strategic economic revolution. Before they started making changes nearly 40 years ago, China was very poor and tightly controlled under general leader Mao. The economy was inefficient and the country was mostly cut off from the rest of the world. But in 1978, after Mao passed away, the Chinese government decided to move away from its old Soviet-style economic policy. They started to slowly introduce free market principles and opened up trade and investment with the West. The goal was simple: boost economic growth and improve living standards for the people. And it worked. After opening up foreign trade and investment in 1979, China became one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Their annual GDP growth averaged 9.5%, which the World Bank called the fastest sustained expansion by a major economy in history. Basically, China turned into world's factory. Now, there are 2 key reasons that helped China become the manufacturing superpower it is today. Liberalization. In the 1980s, China, even though it was a communist country, decided to open its economy. They allowed private entrepreneurs to start their own businesses and invited foreign companies to set up shop in China. To make this happen, they created 4 special economic zones: Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xiamen. These zones were like magnets for foreign companies because they offered amazing benefits like tax breaks, cheap land, and access to huge workforce. Big names like Apple, Nike, and Toyota couldn't resist this opportunity. Now, compare this to India. India was much slower in creating these kinds of investor-friendly policies. This move by China was a key reason behind their economic boom. In the 1990s, India also started opening up its socialist economy, following China's lead. And India's economy did grow faster after these reforms, but it never hit the double-digit growth numbers that China achieved. So what did China do differently? China followed the investment-led growth model. It's basically an economic strategy where a country pumps a huge amount of money into building things like roads, factories, and other productive assets to boost its economy. In poor countries like China and India, back in the 1980s, there was a lot of potential in the people, but they are held back because they don't have enough infrastructure, knowledge, or tools like machinery to be productive. So, to grow at an incredible speed, a poor country needs to invest at an incredible speed, building building infrastructure and creating productive assets. But here's the big question. Where did China get all the money to make this happen? China got the money from two main sources. The first source was foreign direct investment. This came from the special economic zones which attract lot of foreign companies to invest in China. The second source was domestic saving. In China, people traditionally save a lot of money, around 40 to 50% of their income. That's way higher than in most other countries. But instead of letting all this saving just sit in the personal bank accounts, the government did something really clever. They controlled all the major banks like the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, Bank of China and China Construction Bank. They weren't just regular banks, they were tools for government's economic plans, like a national investment fund but built right into the banking system. For example, a farmer in Sichuan saving money in the bank might not even realize it, but their savings could be used to build a new highway in Shanghai. The government used entire country's saving as a way to drive its economic strategy. This was very different from how things work in market-driven economies like the US or India. In those countries, banks usually make decisions based on what's profitable. But in China, banks made decisions based on the country's long-term economic goals. They weren't just thinking about the short-term gains, they were focused on transforming the entire economy. But what about India? Why didn't we try to follow China's investment-led growth model and pour massive amounts of money into factories and infrastructure? Well, there are three main reasons. First reason is basic education. Back in the 80s and 90s, Chinese workers generally had a better level of basic education compared to the workers in India. This might sound small, but it made a huge difference. Factories, especially set up by foreign companies, needed workers who could at least read, write and follow simple instructions. Think about it. If you are running a factory, you need people who can understand safety guidelines, operate machinery, and follow production processes. Chinese workers were better prepared for this because of the stronger education foundation. This is one of the big reasons why China started attracting so many foreign factories during that time, whereas India struggled with lower literacy rates and uneven access to basic education, which made it harder to attract the same kind of investment. Second, infrastructure challenges. Let's be honest. Our infrastructure is improving, but it's still not at the level of China's. China built massive, well-coordinated projects like highways, ports, airports, and industrial zones, all at the same time. In India, building something as big as an industrial corridor takes a lot more time because of the way our system works, which is our last point, the democratic complexity. Unlike China's top-down approach, where the central government makes decisions and everyone follows, India is a democracy. That means we need everyone's consent to get things done. If you're trying to build a massive factory in India, first you would need approvals from multiple levels of government, local, state and central. Each level has its own rules and getting everyone on the same page can take forever. Then you'd have to deal with local communities. People might protest because they're worried about losing their land, their livelihood or their environment. And even if you manage to address their concerns, you still have to navigate complicated land acquisition laws, which can drag on for years. This democratic complexity is both a strength and a challenge. On one hand, it protects people's rights and ensures that development is inclusive. On the other hand, it makes it harder to execute large-scale projects quickly. But there's actually a deeper difference between how the governments in China and India function, which is our second key point that helped China's grow: local government function. Both China and India have massive decentralized economies. This means that getting things like education, investment and FDI right isn't just about decisions at the top. It's about what happens at the local level. Local government are the ones who actually implement these changes, and for that they need right incentives. Now, if we look at how China's local government work, we can see they had the perfect incentives to boost both local investment and foreign investment. First, all local government in China are part of the Chinese Communist Party. The officials there weren't promoted or demoted based on how much people liked them or how loyal they were to their bosses. Instead, their careers depended on how well they grew their local economy. Second, a big part of their revenue came from selling land, and land becomes more valuable when you build the right infrastructure around it. So, if local governors wanted to move up in the party, one of the best ways was to build infrastructure. Because of these incentives, local Chinese governors were extremely motivated to make things as easy as possible for foreign investors. They wanted factories, businesses and projects to come to their cities because it helped them grow the economy and their careers. This system created a win-win situation. Foreign companies got what they needed and local governments got the growth they wanted. It's a big reason why China was so successful in attracting investment and building its economy. Take Elon Musk's Gigafactory in China for example. When he came to China, the local Shanghai government cleared every legal hurdle for him. That's why Tesla factory was up and running in just 6 months. Now, compare this to India. While the central government keeps saying India is a great place for foreign investment, local government often makes it really hard for foreign companies to set up shop. They strictly enforce complicated regulations and getting around them takes forever. This creates a lot of frustration for investors who just want to get things done quickly. Now, coming to the most important question, why India cannot grow as rapidly as China? First, India's local government are seriously understaffed, especially compared to China. When China was growing, it made sure to build up its local government capacity. But in India, a typical district might have only 10-15 administrative officers handling tasks that would need 50 to 100 officers in a better staff system. Also, in the US and China, most government employees work at the local level, with fewer at state and federal level who are there just to monitor overall progress. But in India, it's the opposite. Most government employees work at the state or central level, and only a handful work locally. This is a big reason why India's local government struggle to invest or help foreign investors navigate the rules the way China did. Now, you might think, if local governments are understaffed, why not just give them more money to hire more people? Well, it's not that simple. Even with high unemployment, many local governments in India have thousands of job positions sitting empty. So what's going on? Why aren't these jobs being filled? Well, it's because of India's infamous caste system. The caste system is technically illegal in India, but in many parts of the country, it's still a political and social reality. This caste system explains why India's local governments often don't work well. Let me break it down. First, our founders knew that caste system was still strong at the local level. So they deliberately made sure local governments didn't have too much power. They didn't want caste biases to influence decisions too heavily. Second, even if local government had enough staff, they might not have right incentives. Sometimes they block or slow down good policies from the central government because those policies don't align with the interests of dominant caste groups in their area. Third, in some extreme cases, government jobs stay vacant because only people from higher castes are considered for them. In many rural and even urban offices, hiring and promotions are quietly influenced by caste. Many talented people from certain backgrounds often get pushed aside or excluded from the important roles. This isn't just a social problem. It's a huge roadblock for economic development. When local governments don't function properly because of caste, it affects everything from infrastructure to investment to growth. In China, local governments had strong incentives to build infrastructure and attract foreign companies because their promotions in the Communist Party depended on it. They could push aside local concerns to get things done. But in well-functioning democracies, this doesn't have to be a problem. Democracy itself can give local leaders the right incentives. If you're a local governor and you grow the economy, you're more likely to get re-elected. In fact, most growth miracles like Germany, Italy, Japan and the US happened in democracies. So why isn't this working well in India? There are two big reasons. First, India's democracy started early, but it got stuck in a vicious cycle. Early on, public services like school and hospitals were poor. As a result, wealthier people started using private schools and hospitals instead. Now, they are less willing to pay taxes, which makes local government services even worse. It's a cycle that's hard to break. Second, India's local governments are often divided along caste, religion or other groups. Local officials who get elected by these groups tend to focus on rewarding their voters with subsidies or specific benefits rather than investing in public services that help everyone. And the political parties in India have figured out that promising freebies like free electricity, free bus rides or even cash transfers can win them votes. So instead of investing long-term infrastructure or economic growth, they focus on short-term handouts. This might win elections, but it doesn't build a stronger economy. And lastly, politicians in India often focus on public projects that are highly visible and easy to deliver. For example, they might prefer building a flashy metro system over improving education system because the results of a metro are immediate and people can see them, while better education takes years to show its impact. Now, let's connect the dots. India didn't grow as fast as China because it lacked basic education, didn't invest enough, and didn't attract as much foreign investment. But the deeper reason is that India's local governments didn't have the capacity or the right incentives to fix these issues. They were understaffed and the caste system in India's early democracy created the wrong incentives. Local leaders often focused on short-term gains and catering to specific groups rather than investing in long-term projects. Even though the central government had good intentions, these problems at the local level are still around today. That's why India can't grow like China did. But does this mean there's no hope for India to ever catch up to China? India is slowly but definitely catching up. First, if we compare India today to where it was in 1980s, we have come a long way. Sure, we haven't had miracle growth like China, but people are better educated now and our infrastructure, especially digital and financial, has improved a lot. Plus, foreign companies are looking for alternatives to China. And in theory, India is a great position to attract a lot of foreign investment. But so far, FDI in India hasn't been anything to brag about because local governments don't have the capacity or right incentives to help foreign companies navigate our complicated rules. Now, India's growth model is very different from China's. We are not following their manufacturing first approach. Instead, we are focusing on a service-driven transformation model. While China was building factories, we are building software, creating digital platforms, and becoming the world's back office. Companies like Infosys, TCS, and Wipro aren't just Indian companies. They're global tech giants. Our IT exports alone contributes nearly 8% of our GDP and over 50% of our service exports. And it's not just IT. India is becoming a startup nation. In 2022, we became the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. From digital payment platforms like Paytm to e-commerce giants like Flipkart, we are not just using technology, we are creating it. On the manufacturing side, we are taking a different approach too. Instead of mass manufacturing, we are focusing on niche areas like electronics, pharmaceuticals, automobiles, electric vehicles, and specialized engineering goods. Coming to the end of the video, I want to leave you with this. There's a big fundamental difference in how India and China grow. China's model is top-down, state-controlled, and driven by manufacturing. India's model is bottom-up, democratic, and driven by service and innovation. Is it perfect? Definitely no. But it's ours, and it's working in its own way. India's journey is unique, and while we may not grow like China, we are making our own path. The question is not whether we can catch up to China, but how we can make this model work better for everyone. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. And make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to TBH for more such content. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.